Welcome to Weird Web Radio, an explorer's guide to hidden worlds of the paranormal and occult, reality-expanding experiences, and the downright weird and bizarre. With your host, Lonnie Scott.
And we are recording. Luxa, welcome back to Weird Web Radio. It is fucking awesome to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me, Lonnie. I'm stoked to be back.
All right. And for those of you who don't know who Luxa is, shame on you. Been here before. It's been a few years. And Luxa is the host of an incredibly packed, full of content, awesome insights, guests, and just the production value of it alone. It's like listening to this amazing occult themed radio show called Lux Occult Podcast. So please do go check that out. If you like this show, I promise you're going to like that one. And Lux is also the creator, I believe. You are the sole creator, right, of the Green Mushroom Project?
Yeah, I'm the sort of designer and architect. Some friends and I actually launched it together when the time came to sort of like fire it off. But yes, I was the one doing a lot of the research and whatnot.
Okay. And then there is the wonderful community you've built on Discord and facilitate. And I think that's free to enter for anyone, correct?
Yeah, I've been really lucky to have found people that kind of had shared interests and everything, and to have done some cool magical collaboration and hanging out and talking about esoterica and philosophy and things like that. And yeah, thank you so much for the kind words. I really appreciate that. I've always been a fan of like talk radio and things like that. And the idea of having a sort of occult talk radio show was something that I thought was fun. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to go for. And yeah, thank you for saying. And one of the excellent guests that you can hear, by the way, is Lonnie, of course. So yeah, check that out.
Yeah, I've graced your audiences with my rambling once or twice.
Yeah, you've been on a couple of times, I think. Yeah,
yes.
Talking about a few different things. Inclusive heathenry, I think, was the most recent one. And yeah, I really appreciate your work on that. I think that's a really important thing.
I do too. And I appreciate every opportunity I get to talk about it with anyone, but especially with someone, with our similar backgrounds. We get along great, and it's been great, growing our friendship over the years and collaborating with you on projects, as I love to call them, the fuck around, find out projects.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now the first one of those, I guess we'll just dig in right there. The first one of those projects was kind of like, it's supposed to be like a print magazine. It reminded me of sort of the throwback to when in Chaos Magic in particular, there were all these, like anthology zine projects that were always floating around the internet.
Exactly. Yeah, it actually is a zine. We do have a couple of print copies, but it's also available for free as a PDF. And this was a really cool way to showcase a lot of the talent that we have in the community. There's a lot of really talented artists, occultists, writers, people of all stripes hanging out. So yeah, that was a really cool opportunity there.
Yeah, it is really cool, and I was glad I got a chance to contribute to that. And then you went on and did an audio project along the similar theme, and I'm not entirely sure ever how to describe the audio that I hear. How would you describe this? Because it's not necessarily like a genre of music or anything of that sort. It's something else.
Kind of along similar lines of the zine, we wanted to put out a mixtape, right? So this is kind of it's not as curated in terms of the song order. That was actually selected via a sort of divinatory process that my partner in crime on this project, Keats Ross from the Pragmagic podcast, was doing. But we basically gave people the parameters of sending us their magical audio, their sound sigils, their, work that's inspired by occult themes or esoteric themes. I think we set a time limit of like 6 minutes or something like that. But yeah, basically we, just asked for people to give us those types of contributions. And we got a really fun mix of stuff that you can hear on Bandcamp and everything. I can send you a link to that if you'd like, Lonnie.
Yes. And I'll make sure that everybody has links to all these things in the show notes. You said that you guys came up with this through a divination project. What was that?
Oh, actually, the song order that the titles appear in was arrived at via a divinatory process that Keats Ross did. So I actually can't speak that much on how he came up with the song. It was complicated and cool, but you'll have to ask him about exactly how that worked. He told me, but I apologize. I can't remember exactly what the details that went into it were. But yeah, this has been a really cool and interesting, kind of project. We started the Green Mushroom Project with 4 kind of like main objectives, and one of them was to build community and allow people to sort of like use this current to do creative, restorative, and healing type of magic. This is a sort of like Venus aspected thing, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So if you'd like, I can share the 4 objectives of the Green Mushroom Project.
Because I would like to dig into that, because we talked a little bit about the Green Mushroom Project the last time you were on the show, and that's been a few years. And I think, especially as someone who's participated in the project in my own way, I can see how it has shaped itself. It's become a thing. It's really taken on life and form and community, and there are ways to tap into this that have been developed over time. Like you were talking about, people could get into the current, but I don't know that anyone knows exactly how you would do that either. So I'd like to talk a lot more about that too.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I like that you brought up the idea of it kind of taking on a life of its own, because I'll start out by giving people the context that this is kind of based on a biological metaphor. In ecology, there are some fungi, usually they're mushrooms, ones that create mushrooms that have symbiotic relationships with some types of plants. So the metaphor basically goes like this. Like, if we, the practitioners who take part in this project, are like a forest of trees or a stand of trees, the current, the magical mushroom current, is the sort of underground mycelial web that connects this forest of trees, allows it to share resources, and basically strengthens the whole organism. So yeah, that's kind of what we're working with in terms of what the thinking was there. This came around during the fall of 2020. I first started doing like the research and stuff in the summer of 2020, but we launched it officially on Halloween of 2020. So at the time, there was a lot of forces that kind of seemed to be dividing people, not just in like physical ways, but also in like other types of ways, socially. There was a lot of tension surrounding a lot of things, and that continues on, I think, in a sort of cycle that seems to be kind of rearing up again. But so the idea of like really wanting to sort of connect and to have that strength of a biological connection through a sort of technological means is another thing that was interesting. This sort of like meeting of biology and technology, and what might that look like and stuff. So getting to the 4 objectives, the first one was to create a network of green magic for practitioners to draw upon for healing, creative, and restorative magical work. As I mentioned, this is a sort of Venus aspected thing. This was accomplished by basically like working with the sigil. I was really inspired by a lot of the work that the DKMU did with the linking sigil, and the mushroom hypho sigil is kind of like that. It's a web sigil. Hypho means web. So it does have a sort of like principle to it that it will create this sort of like current or field if it's used in a high enough concentration or whatever. So we basically established the current by working with the sigil in a variety of different ways. There were people that were traveling, hiking, writing it on, rocks, or people doing art with it, all kinds of different things. So the second objective was to build and strengthen our community and empower individuals within it. So this has been sort of accomplished by, really the Discord servers, where we're sort of centralizing all of these efforts and everything. And also encouraging individuals to use powerful magical technologies to become more agentic. So the idea of having a incubatory space where people could really spread their wings and explore with, others in terms of like, what might this artistic experimental thing look like, or something like that, is something that we were really interested in experimenting with, and still are. We're actually doing some really fun and interesting stuff right now in terms of experimenting with hypersigil tech, or something adjacent to it. So if I mention Hyper Sigil Tech, I should probably mention Aidan Wachter's work. You know, the idea of the Black Book and everything has been so popular. And I think...
And there you have it. Aidan
Yeah.
Wachter, once again, welcome to Weird Web
Welcome to
Radio.
the
You
chat.
always show up even when you're not here.
Yeah, well, welcome to the chat, Aidan. But yeah, anyway, things like that, like encouraging people to sort of like use that type of powerful tech to make the types of changes that they want to make in their own lives. And then, you know, cumulatively, that can also look like us making bigger changes together too, perhaps. We're not sure. Experimental, as I said.
Yeah.
And the fourth objective is to strengthen our positions against hate group and, excuse me, our fourth objective is to strengthen our position against hate groups and other bullshit through solidarity. There's a sort of, and I'm sure that this is something that your listeners might be aware of, but there is sort of a disturbing amount of that type of stuff which crops up in occultism and everything. And I think that not only was it interesting, like, to experiment with the idea of like what would it look like to have a sort of like counter current to what all of that might entail in a magical sense, but also just wanting to have a space away from that, really, in a more pragmatic sense as well. So yeah, in a nutshell, that is basically the thinking behind it.
I totally dig it, obviously, and it's cool how you break all that down. Now, there have been ways that people tap into the current, right? If so, they listen to the objectives, they want to be involved somehow. How do you actually, as a magical practitioner, start getting involved, tapping into that current magically? What do you suggest people do first?
Well, I think it really depends on the individual and sort of like what their inclinations are. If you're somebody who likes to do art and magic together, you know, working with the sigil in terms of like making some type of artistic project could be a way in for you. We have several guided meditations that might be a way that people could sort of connect with that as well. There is also the opportunity to come hang out with us and talk with us on Fungal Friday, which is a chat that we do every Friday night on our Discord server. We have different magical topics and different people will sort of take turns presenting about things that they're into, or we'll sometimes do ceremonies or rituals or play little magical games and whatnot. And at midnight every Friday, we read our statement of resistance together before lighting a candle with the green mushroom sigil on it. Would you like me to read the statement of resistance for you?
Absolutely.
Okay. So it goes like this. Resist. Resist by maintaining sovereignty of the self. Resist by maintaining love of the self. Resist by maintaining fierce loyalty to love and pleasure. Resist with acts of radical kindness. Focus on the path to better times. And then we usually say, fuck yeah. It's kind of our... All right, fuck yeah. And then we light the candle. Yeah. I actually usually light the candle and then say, fuck yeah. But people have their own little rituals with that. So yeah, that's another way that people might be able to come and, you know, see if it's for them or not. Not everything is for everyone, of course. But, you know, yeah, if it strikes your fancy, then everybody's welcome.
Yeah, I say, fuck yeah has become my favorite way to end a ritual. Ever since I met you, you know?
Well, fuck yeah.
Exactly, fuck yeah. And in our typical fashion, fuck Crowley. Yeah.
Well, maybe I like this idea of fuck yeah, and that being a sort of good segue to talk about one of our newer experiments with Green Mushroom Project, and that is a sort of way that I think we're sort of taking our work further. This idea of like maintaining sovereignty of the self, maintaining love of the self, these types of things. The idea of self is something that I'm taking from it. The idea of it's very much informed with like Austin Osman Spare's work and everything. So there's all kinds of ideas about how this part of ourselves connects with the greater divinity or Kia or whatever. So I think when we talk about self in the context of the statement of resistance, it's that inner divinity, not necessarily in like a more individualistic way where it's like fuck everybody else or whatever. People should read it how they like, but that's sort of how I read it. So but yeah, the idea of like maintaining sovereignty of self and the idea of fuck yeah and all this other stuff, like, and the idea of aligning wills as well. Like when we do group magic together, because magic is all about intent, how do we figure out if all of our intentions are really aligned in a way? Like communication is so difficult communicating about esoteric things, especially, how often have you tried to, describe a experience that you had in your magical practice to a friend, only to sort of like have the words fall apart in your mouth? And so it can be really difficult and complicated to sort of find a place where we are, definitely sure that our wills are aligning and whatnot. And so the idea of consent, in addition to it being like ethically attractive and something that is important for functional operations of groups and whatnot, I think it's really interesting from that magical perspective of how can we align intention, and also the idea of its alchemical properties. Like, when we consent, there's a saying that the Romans had, that like it's basically like what we consent to won't harm us. So basically, like if we choose to do something, that's a much different experience than having that thing forced upon us, right? How different is it to go to church because you're super into like what's being taught there, versus being like dragged there as a child when you really don't want to go or something? Those are two hugely different experiences, and the line that kind of divides them is consent. So this is something that we're going to be investigating in a sort of magical way, and really excited to be offering some resources to the chaos magic and broader occult communities surrounding consent education, specifically geared for magical folks. So yeah, we're very stoked about it.
Yeah, I think it's cool that you're going down that road too, and with consent in particular applied to the realm of magic. For people listening, I think they might understand. Yes, I can see where this would be. No, I don't want to go to that church. Versus, I really dig what they're doing over there. I want to go there.
Mm-hmm.
But magically speaking, where does consent play if you're in ritual alone, or working with spirits, or working in a group with others? I mean, there are tiers here, right?
Oh yeah, great question. I think that context is always so important, right? There's not ever going to be a sort of golden rule that fits every situation, right? You're always, maybe the golden rule is to look at the context or something, but yeah. So yeah, I think that really depends on, I think when it comes to your own personal practice, I think that everybody has to sort of think about their own relationship with the idea of consent, and with their relationship with the spirits that they work with, and what those words mean semantically, right? Like, I think there's a lot of, we don't have a lot of clear and concise understandings about consent in our culture, or in a lot of cultures. We see a lot of really bad examples of it in the media, of people, in what are termed romantic comedies, doing these things that are oftentimes like really problematic and stuff.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense that there's a lot of confusion surrounding this stuff. But so I think when it comes to your own personal practice, there's whole traditions that are like surrounding, binding spirits against their will, compelling them, these types of words, right? Like, and I mean, I think it's up to the individual practitioner to decide like how they're going to interact with those types of things and how they're going to contextualize them. It's complicated, I suppose, is the short answer.
It is.
I mean, for myself personally, like I usually would prefer to like work with anybody, whether it's a spirit or another person or whatever, like that we're both on the same page. We both want the same things. Like, there's a sort of synergy there that I find really attractive and I like. So that's what I'm into. But there's different people that are into different things when it comes to this type of thing. And yeah, people got to make that decision for themselves. I think when it comes to working with people in a group, though, it's maybe not as, in my view, laissez-faire, because if you want to be able to work with those people again, want to make sure that everybody's cool with what's going on and everybody feels cool about it afterwards, right? And
right.
So if that's not the case, I mean, just from a pragmatic standpoint, then that's not going to be a very functional group, right? And so yeah, ethics aside, right? I mean, we could definitely like say ethically, yeah, fuck yeah, we love consent, like that's what we want, right? But even getting away from that, we could make the argument from a pragmatic standpoint as well. So
I dig it. I totally dig it. And thank you again for just pushing that as an agenda and as something that should be talked about in magical spaces, magical communities, because I think often these are the sorts of ethics and values when people are pursuing the occult road in particular that don't get a lot of attention. Like you said, there's whole traditions of get thy ass in this triangle and do as I want,
Sure.
instead of building relationship and having consent. And, it reminds me too of the time I was in the ADF for those years. We would hold public rituals on all of the high days, the modern neo-pagan high days. And the senior druid of the group, Ashley, would always like print out the ritual and cut out pieces of each section and essentially, give the whole spiel of this is what's going to happen. This is the structure of the ritual. And if you would like to take part, who wants to do this part? Who wants to do this part? If you don't want to do any of these parts, wonderful. Thank you for being here. That kind of thing. It was built on that idea of consent right there at the start. And I always loved that about our public group.
Yeah, very cool. And yeah, I think that you bring up an important thing, like, having the forethought to be able to inform everybody about, what's going to happen to the point where they're able to provide informed consent, because informed consent is the only type of consent, right? You have to know what you're consenting to in order to say that you consent to it, right? We can get in, if you can get into some different discussion areas about consensual non-consent and everything, and kink and everything, but in general, yes, consent is absolutely informed, and even consensual non-consent is also informed and negotiated very carefully. So yes.
Yeah. Now this is all taken shape into a thing that you're calling Void House. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Void House is our experiment in creating a consent forward magical space to do group work in person and online. We're going to be doing we've had a couple of in-person meetings. It's been going really well, and we're planning some others in the future, which I'm excited about. We're also planning some activities that are going to be a little bit more things that might have like a higher risk. So we want to take more steps to mitigate those risks by having people have a little bit of education before they take part in it. We're going to have a group work circle, a sort of like magical support circle that we're going to use to do maybe some shadow work, maybe some magical integration work in terms of like, hey, I need help unpacking this magical experience or something like that. But these types of things, we want people to have the magical consent education and be sort of like up to date on the consent culture items that we're trying to establish before taking part in these things. So Void House is a sort of umbrella under which we're putting our more maybe intense types of projects.
Mm-hmm. Okay. When you have in-person meetups, what's the flow of events there? Since it's a magical group getting together, right? And it's under the umbrella of Void House. Like, how do the agendas get formed? I guess do you guys decide democratically in a way what rituals you will do, or what spirits you might honor, or what activities might be had, or is it something pre-planned ahead? Are there goals and initiatives set forth at the beginning? I'm really curious how it all operates under the hood.
Yeah, well, we've only had a couple, so this is still very much experimental, and we're still kind of like feeling out what it's going to look like and evolve into. But it's very much a democratic process. We'll, get together as whoever wants to attend these meetings will get together as like a private group and begin to plan, work out logistics, have a couple meetings to do vibe checks, make sure that everybody is on the same page, check in with each other about whatever concerns we might have, negotiate surrounding boundaries like, hey, I don't like to get up early. Like, please do not fucking wake me up early, everybody. Like, things like that. Just, which, those things are important. They should be respected, right? So having a chance to kind of hash that out before we're in the mix and everything is helpful and everything. We've begun by having, sort of orientation in which we discuss our, agreements surrounding like respecting each other's boundaries and coming to common understandings about definitions surrounding consent and stuff like that, just to make sure everybody's on the same page before we begin. And then oftentimes people will bring an activity, a magical activity of some kind that is something that they're interested in at the time and they want to share, and we will hang out and do magic. And when we went to Portland, we spent a lot of time as well exploring the city. Shout out to Reverend Eric from the Arnemancy podcast, who was very, very kind and like kind of acting as tour guide and really bringing us to a lot of like fun places in Portland that I don't think I would have found on my own. So that was a really cool experience. And yeah, it's been very rad.
That is really cool. I did see, I was looking over, one of the upcoming meetups, and there's a phrase you use in the document. You keep saying magical potluck. What do you mean when you say magical potluck?
Like whatever dish you've been into cooking, you can like bring some to share if you want to.
Gotcha.
Like
okay.
if you're like, experimenting with some new rune thing or whatever you're into, right? You can bring that, and if you want to, you don't have to, but you can bring that to share with people. So
yeah, I made rune-shaped cookies. No,
I would love to eat some rune-shaped cookies. I'm here for
Who
it.
wouldn't?
They have to be gluten-free, though, unfortunately.
Oh,
yeah, I know. It's sad because everything delicious has gluten in it.
Oh, that's not true. Well, it might be true. I don't know. A moment of silence for all the gluten-free peeps.
Yes.
All right. If people want to get involved with Void House and that thing, like how would someone enter into that?
Same way that if they want to come hang out on the server and come, take part in the consent education stuff that we're offering, that's kind of the main crux there, is we're going to be asking people to take part in the consent education, and there's also going to be a couple of different steps that we're going to have people do. One of them is going to be involving what I think we're going to be calling a magical risk assessment, but we might change the name. That doesn't roll off the tongue very well.
No.
But conceptually,
magical risk assessment.
It's it's basically a profile that you can like make for yourself, where you decide like what you're up to and what you want to be doing and what is on the table and what's off the table and like what's outside of like something that you would normally want to do. So once you have this little roadmap, you can be in a situation where there's a lot of like peer pressure, even if people aren't overtly pressuring you. If everybody in a group is like, oh yeah, I can't wait to do that, more likely than not you're going to feel pressure as a social creature to go along with that. And that can affect your judgment and stuff. If you have this like roadmap, that's a way of saying like, okay, look, that's actually something that's out of the boundaries for me, so I'm not going to do that. Regardless of how fun it sounds right now in the moment, I know like long term, this is a choice that I've made that's not something that's a good idea for me. So like, regardless of how cool and fun it sounds as I'm all excited right now, just things like that. Like this is tech that a lot of people in the kink community might be familiar with, because this is something that people will have to protect themselves from similar things, taking part in something that they might regret afterwards, right?
Now you have said kink community more than a few times since we brought up
I'm
Void
sorry,
House and everything.
Do you need me to define what that is?
No, I don't, but listeners might.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Let me explain. Yeah.
Yep.
I am a member of the BDSM community locally here where I am. There's a lot of variation in terms of like what these communities are like on a local basis and everything. But a lot of the ideas surrounding consent education and some of the other things about, protecting oneself and others and assessing risk and taking steps to mitigate risk where possible are things that I've learned by being a member of that community. And I think there's a lot of crossover that I've seen in terms of the activities that take place, when we're playing with power, when we're playing with other things like that. There's a lot of intersection between what's done in a kink practice and what's done in a magical practice, even down to the idea of there being rituals or, contained spaces like a magical circle or a kink scene or something, right? So I think there's a lot of conceptual overlap, and I think there's a lot of places where these two communities can learn from each other. And that's something that yeah, I'm kind of excited about as well. And there's a lot of conceptual overlap and a lot of people that are into both, but I think that there's a lot of times where I've seen people engaging in kink activities and doing things that I would contextualize as magic, but they're just not thinking about it that way.
You just suggest that them maybe have an intent while they're going at it? No.
Well, oftentimes they do.
Yeah.
They're oftentimes a very distinct intent, and that's a very intentional and well thought out and well negotiated. Everybody knows what's going to happen during this scene, right? And it's being done oftentimes for a very explicit purpose of maybe somebody wanting to have a particular experience, but oftentimes that particular experience might mean something on a sort of bigger, more personal scale. So, and not always, sometimes it's just for like sexy fun or whatever.
Yeah.
It's also, I should note also, there's a lot of people who identify as asexuals who are kinky people. It's not really necessarily about sex for everybody, which is another thing that people seem to get confused about, which for good reason. There's a lot of confusion and a lot of bad examples in the media, a lot of harmful examples, I would say, actually. So yeah.
Yeah, and we could say the same for people getting into magic and
Absolutely.
whatnot.
Yeah.
You know, it's not always about sex, folks.
Yes.
Despite what those books in the 90s said in most of those spells. No.
Well, and it's interesting how many of these, like thinking back to the sort of satanic panic and everything, it's interesting to me how much of the accusations that were made seem to be these like projections of these fantasies, right? It's like this really interesting glimpse into this sort of fantasy world of, I don't know. Yeah, sorry, I'm getting into the weeds here. But,
no, it does. You're not wrong. I mean, I can get on a soapbox about the Satanic Panic era forever. The thing that bothers me most about that kind of thing is it has not gone away. It just comes by different names now.
We're ramping up to some wild shit, it seems like, dude.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like,
yeah.
Yes.
And I've had friends foaming at the mouth, furious over the idea that there were children being hurt in the back of a pizza place. Right? The whole Pizzagate thing, they call it. The
place didn't even have a fucking basement.
I know. But I could inform them of the very real global problem of the Catholic Church's institutionalized child sexual predators who get moved around and have been proven to atrocities all over the world for now generations. And I'm an asshole for saying such a thing. You know,
again, projection, like the idea of projection, like they're hurting these kids. No, you're the ones fucking hurting the kids. Like, what the fuck, you know?
Yes, yeah. Which goes back to consent and.
Well, yes, minors cannot consent. Yes.
Let's just make that super fucking clear.
Or they cannot consent to sexual activity. I mean, they can consent to other things, like, do you want to eat this piece of pizza or whatever? But, like, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Under no circumstances do I condone that kind of shit. Like, it's never okay. Yeah, but like I said, we could get on that soapbox and that'd be a whole series of shows.
Let's back away from that cliff then.
Let's back away from that monster for a minute. Just suffice it to say, it was bullshit then, it's bullshit now. Whatever name it goes by.
Absolutely. And yes, I'm waiting with rapt fascination and horror to see what new manifestation it might take next. So
same. Yeah, it will always do so. Backing up a little bit, when you were talking about self, you know, maintaining sovereignty of self and so on. And then you started talking about Austin Osman Spare and his idea of self and the deeper meaning of Kia. And I think these are things that some people listening may not know. So let's begin with Austin Osman Spare. Why Spare? Why is he important?
Okay, well, Spare is definitely a very influential figure on modern occultism and chaos magic especially. A lot of the sigil methods that you find in the more popular chaos magic books are sort of derived from Spare's techniques. I would suggest people actually read Spare for themselves and maybe derive those techniques in a way that makes sense to them. I think there might be some places in the popular literature where there's some misunderstandings about having to forget the sigils. Sorry, I'm getting into the weeds here, but in general, he's very...
I like that weed.
Okay.
We're going to put a pin in that
Okay,
one.
yeah, let's return to that then. But
Yes.
yeah, I think he's a very important figure in chaos magic and in modern occultism in general. He was a contemporary with Crowley, so lived around that time, but really was a bit more of an iconoclast, a really talented visual artist, all kinds of like really intense, magical, sometimes grotesque images that just really sort of are alive in the way that they're like magically quickened. You can just kind of tell that it's like dense with magic. And the idea of using art as like a magical vehicle is something that I've always found to be like a really natural thing. So Spare is somebody who I've always kind of resonated with. Mm-hmm. He was also very much like punk rock before that was even a fucking thing. Like he was kind of like really just sort of like wanted to do shit his own way, didn't care about, you know, being a member of like the high class society. He was kind of given a couple of chances to go and be like, you know, fancy and well known and everything, and he kind of chose to like stay in the like, you know, not very affluent neighborhood that he grew up in and like hang out in taverns and kick it with prostitutes and just like do whatever the fuck he wanted.
I know that guy. No.
So...
We all know that guy. No.
You know, but yeah, I mean, he was, I think that he was really committed to living his life like in an authentic way, which is something that I also, you know, can really respect and everything. So, and it's, which, if we look at other occultists of the time, is not always the case. There's a lot of, we think about, you know, and not to throw dispersion on how influential she was, but like, you know, Helena Blavatsky, you know, and some of the like ideas of like secret masters and all of this shit. Like Spare is never like, oh yeah, you gotta go fucking join this club and talk to the secret masters and wear this robe. Like it's like, no, like the self, it's you, it's inside you, you know, like the connection is within, and you can like, you know, access that. You can sort of like have this relationship of like self-love, which is a sort of conversation with the self and with the divine and with I guess the subconscious. He was very much into what we would probably now call the psychological metal, which is very popular at its time. Crowley very much sits there as well, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. So the idea of sigil magic really did get plucked from Spare's work, as I understand it, mostly.
Yeah, I mean, like the way that
where the credit always goes.
Spare people call this the Spare method, right? The like the set it and forget it method, right? Like,
that's right. Yeah. And you're saying that there's a problem with the forget it part.
I don't think it's necessary to actually like literally forget it. Spare talks about it like being implanted in the subconscious. There's also talk of like obsession as well, right? Like, so if you're somebody that has a hard time forgetting sigils after you do stuff with them, like I would suggest not worrying about it and just like doing whatever makes sense to you. Like there's one of the most common questions that I get about this is, I'm not doing this right because I can't get myself to forget about the sigil. And I always say, don't worry about that. Do if you can't forget about it, like then maybe you just put it right in front of you all the time or something and obsess over it. Like that's one of the ideas that goes into like making a servitor, right? Is an ongoing kind of an operation perhaps, and the boundaries between these two things get quite blurry for me when I really start to interrogate it. But perhaps a metaphor that could work is that a sigil could be thought of as sort of like entering a command into a computer, perhaps, where a servitor could be looked at more as like a program that continues to run. And this is, you know, information model stuff. The animists out there are clutching at their pearls, right? But yeah, if that, hopefully that metaphor makes sense, though.
Yeah. The Laura Tempest Zakharov entered an idea into sigil magic that I think makes perfect sense. Just the act of creating the sigil is activating it, is doing the job. And I've always sort of felt that way too. As a hypnotist now for the last 15 years, I can tell you that when people say they're forgetting these sigils by masturbation and exhaustion and et cetera, so all the various methods that have been presented to us over time, I'll go out on a limb and say many of them haven't actually forgotten it, not the way they want to think they have.
Has it been implanted in the subconscious though, Lonnie?
That's what you did when you drew it.
Okay, well then maybe that is the ritual then for you.
Yeah.
Like, and that makes sense. Like, that I've often found that to be perfectly fine. Or there's an idea of like sigil bleed, right? Where you have the effect occur before you even have the chance to make the sigil or something, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I don't know. Yeah, magic is weird. So I don't know.
It's very weird, and it's probably, if you decide it's going to work a way, it very well might work that way.
Sure. I mean, in chaos magic, we talk about belief being a tool and stuff, and this is one of the reasons why I will tell people, like, well, if that makes sense to you, then do it that way. Like, whatever clicks, whatever's going to be easiest for you to sort of like believe, right, for yourself.
Yeah, I think it is important to like, use as much or as little decoration, pomp, ceremony, music, everything that you can think of to get yourself in that magical mindset, whatever that is for you. You'll know it when you feel it. It's like art and porn. You just know it when you see it.
Not sure what it is, but I know it when I see it.
That's right. I think if you blend that with really tapping into something that's also been, part of a tradition or something tried and true over time, that you just amplify the effect. At least that's what I found for myself. That's why I found a comfortable route in heathenry so well. The world view of it, the mythology around it, the denizens thereof, all plugged real well into my magical mindset. Chaos magic.
Chaos magic. Oh, since we were talking about spirit, would you like me to tell you about my recent experiment with evocation and everything?
Yes.
I recently went out to Kansas City to hang out with a very talented talismanic jeweler, JS Groves. Shout out to JS.
Shout out JS.
They are also a photographer, and was doing like a sort of experiment where, well, first of all, they wanted some people to pose as Aphrodite. So there's a couple Aphrodites of me, like some with a sword, some without, which was pretty rad.
That is rad.
We also did a Venus in Furs one, which I don't know if you're familiar with that IP, but some people out there will love it. And the next day we did a really interesting experiment where I wanted to evoke Spare. I've been working with Spare as a sort of spiritual ancestor, and in a lot of ways like a magical teacher and stuff. I've gotten a lot of tips and tricks from my interactions there, and it's been a really fun and sometimes flirty interaction. And, so yeah, we wanted to see if we could get any sort of like spirit photography while I was doing this ritual. And so I'm, conducting this ritual, reading a lot of Spare stuff, and we've got all this incense going. I haven't seen these shots yet, but apparently there's some cool stuff in there, and I'm really looking forward to it. But I was thinking about the experience of doing this thing, and like, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but like there's this, and this is honestly, it's like one of those cruel jokes of the universe in a way that like one of the most universal human experiences is the idea that you're sort of like alienated and different from all humans, like that we all have this like, which is ironic, right? That we all feel that we're so different and special from each other or whatever. But like,
yeah,
that can be, especially if you're like a weirdo or into magical shit or other niche interests. It can can be difficult to find people that share those interests, and there can be some feelings of isolation and stuff. And during this ritual with Spare and stuff, there was this like a really amazing feeling of sort of like communion, and also of this sort of familial tie that stretched across time in a way. Like, I've done a lot of ancestor work and I've gotten like hints of this before, but it never came through in such a direct way as it did during this experience. So yeah, it was really cool and interesting, and yeah, I really feel grateful about it.
Oh, that is cool. Yeah, especially tying it into like relating it to ancestor work, because for any of us in chaos magic, Spare is a legit ancestor.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think Spare would have had an idea that ancestors were a thing with his notion of Kia?
I think that's my sense in working with Spare, and also from reading some of what he wrote, was that he did think about this, and he did think about like magicians in the future trying to contact him and like wanting he always feels like he wants to party, you know, like he wants to show up, he wants to like, you know, at least that's my sense. So I think that there were others that were kind of considering things along these lines at the time as well, so it wouldn't surprise me.
I like that. Yeah, that's an interesting idea.
In the future, Lonnie, if you were to become an ancestor, how would people summon you? I'm curious.
That's not fair, because I was going to ask you that same question.
I'll get out of your head then.
And we are connected. No, get out of my head. That's just a good interviewer, and you are. You turned the tables. You forgot you're on my show.
Thank you. Sorry. Okay, I apologize. I'll answer.
No. Let's both have this fun. So, how would people get my attention or contact me in the future? It's a really, I don't.
It's kind of a heavy thing to consider. Now that I'm unpacking it, I'm like, man, what would it be?
I'm like, well, I'm thinking like, because immediately into my head comes a part of a Rage Against the Machine song where he's like, where people are struggling, I'll be there. Where people are fighting,
All right.
And that's not me, but that's what I got in my head. So it's like, if you're like, you could definitely play Tool, like certain tracks from Tool, it would, if and call my name and get my attention.
Right on. Love
music
Tool.
For sure. Some really cool drumming would definitely get my attention. If you were calling for me specifically, if you wanted help with magic or spooky shit, or something like that, I'm totally down. Things that would bring joy, just to escalate joy and laughter. Like, I'm always game for that kind of stuff. And if they were calling on me for help with that, yes, I would be that spirit that would show up to help with that. Tarot, divination, totally down for that too. So as I'm unpacking it, there's more and more. There's a lot of ways I think people could get my attention.
What type of offerings do you think would attract your attention?
This version of Lonnie, currently Siesta Key Spiced Rum will get my attention.
Ooh, okay.
Specifically. I'm real big on water being an offering for many, many reasons. And that's a big part of my practice. Water's a giant part of my practice for multiple reasons.
Yeah, water is very magical. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. So water would absolutely be an offering. Keys, because I'm fascinated by them. Mm-hmm, I can't explain it. They just am. And coins. Yeah. Okay. And keys, coins, and water, like, all would be awesome offerings to call on Lonnie.
Awesome.
Think people can't see. I've got my arms raised.
Call upon Lonnie.
Sorry, not you, Dad. Go back. That was my dad's name too. Your turn.
Yeah, I guess I would be totally down to help people out with like their creative projects and stuff like that. I would be into helping people learn about magic and shit. Like, if they needed help discovering something, I think I like the idea of like investigating and finding answers and stuff. So I think if people like you said, divining, I think that could be something that could be fun. Mm-hmm. I would be down to help people with like justice workings or something. Be down for that for sure.
Now we're back to Rage. There it is.
There we go. Wherever there's people.
I can hear De La Roca in my head.
But yeah, for sure. And I think just but yeah, I think teaching people about magic is definitely, I mean, obviously probably both into that since we have these podcasts and shit that's about that. So
Yeah,
it makes sense.
Clearly, we're into it. There's something to that.
Yeah, and I mean, keys and coins are both things that come up often in my practice. Like I work with Hecate like a lot, so key is a huge symbol there, and got a huge thing with coins as well in my walking meditations and everything. So yeah, those would both be good things for me as well. What ablutions would attract my attention, or I guess sacraments they would be. I mean, ablutions. I mean, yes, a shower in rose water, and then
spin 3 times counterclockwise, spitting the whole time. No.
Yeah, I don't drink it too often because I get kind of wild with it. But there is a Hornitos tequila. I think would be definitely something that would attract me. It would be strong enough to attract me from the other side.
I knew it'd be tequila.
Really?
Yo. Tequila, true crime, and ranch dressing.
Oh,
that shall summon and satisfy all white women. No.
Well, ranch dressing is really only good for wrestling and Lonnie.
Oh, well, welcome to a new edition of Weird Web Radio. After Dark.
Sorry, we should save that for your Patreon section.
Yeah, you want to hear the story of wrestling and ranch dressing? And the sigils that can make? You're going to have to join Patreon for that. No. Oh, man. Oh, well, that was fun.
Yeah, sorry, everybody.
Yeah, we took a sidetrack there.
Yeah, that took a strange turn. That's all right.
It always does. Something else I wanted to get into before we went to the Patreon portion was your 23 bibliomancy project, which I think has been pretty cool watching that unfold over time. But for folks who don't know what that is, what is it? What were you up to? What was the goal?
All right, yeah. So this was a very fun experiment that we conducted. The goal of this was to discover the Green Mushroom Project's scripture, if you will. And so the way that we did this is by creating a giant cut-up, or cut-up adjacent thing. I'm not quite sure if I think cut-up is fair. So what we did is on the 23rd day of the month, for 23 months, we met up, and we would take the 23rd line of the 23rd page of whatever book we felt wanted to participate, and we would add it into a spreadsheet. And then we would all roll dice and see what order these lines would appear in. And then we would kind of like read this little paragraph that this exercise would produce and perform some exegesis on it. And the cut-up method is, for people who haven't played around with it, it can be a really powerful divinatory tool. One way of interrogating things is, like, let's say you want to get a deeper meaning about what a passage in a book means or something. Mm-hmm. You can take that passage and cut it up and rearrange it and then read what it tells you in this new order. And it will allow you to sort of like look at things from a completely different perspective and open up a lot of inroads for insight. It's a very generative method as well, so it generates a lot of interesting avenues. So yeah, through this process, we came up with our 23 books, and we've been using it for a variety of different applications. One of them being forming the rituals that we do for our Pirates Revel. So a tradition that we've been doing is, like, when we meet up in person, we have what's known as a Pirates Revel, and this is a sort of ritual party, or is it a party that's a ritual? We're not sure. But usually it's something that kind of, it's obviously pirate themed, but it also sort of entails like self-empowerment and the idea of like really being the captain of your own ship. This very much in the theme of like sovereignty of self and all of that and everything. Oftentimes we will put our foot on a barrel and brag about our future achievements or whatever, things along those lines. But the way that we construct this thing it's a little bit different every time we do it, because the way that we construct it is we roll dice to select 5 lines from our 23 bibliomancy scripture at random, and then we take these 5 lines and figure out what they're telling us about what type of a ritual we'll have.
Interesting. So does that change the theme of a ritual, or like, I guess, the purpose? Because I've done bibliomancy, and I've never looked at it as a way to try to discern like a theme for a ritual. That could be a time consuming, I think, thought project for sure.
The way that we've been doing it is that it sort of informs like the specifics of what's going to happen in the ritual. We have this sort of general theme, which is pirate and self-empowerment and stuff like that, and also celebrating, you know, the current and the fact that we're hanging out and everything. It's a party, as I said. But for instance, one of the things that we decided to do for the most recent one came from the line, I won't be able to quote it verbatim from memory, but it's basically like transmedia news, since gay and mainstream media wasn't covering it. And so there's this idea that like there's some message that is not being able to be heard in the mainstream because the mainstream is like blocking it out. So we thought that it would be cool to have part of this ritual be we're all sort of like chanting a mantra, and we went around in a circle, and each one of us like shouted out something into this, you know, loud cacophony that we wanted to be like news. Something that we wanted to be more visible, you know.
That's awesome.
So that yeah, just one element of the ritual we can do. So that's just an example of how that can sort of inform what we do. So yeah.
Yeah, I dig it. No,
yeah, it's cool. It's fun to sort of to have that flexibility, that creativity, and it really also encourages everybody who's participating to be able to give input, you know, and feel like they're very much more a part of it rather than it's just something that's like happening and they're kind of watching, right?
Do you think chaos magic as we encountered it back in the day versus what's going on now, especially with your project, you see that as like an evolution? Like, because I can think back on like Lieber Knoll, for instance, and there's nothing in Lieber Knoll that would inspire me to end up in a pirate revel doing a ritual like that. But everything you're doing is absolutely chaos magic fueled, in my opinion.
Sure. I mean, I think honestly, a lot of people might be sort of like doing, a lot of postmodern magicians are probably doing something that we would maybe contextualize as chaos magic or chaos magic paradigm or something like that.
Yeah.
There's also the idea that chaos magic itself has a sort of like culture surrounding it, right? So there's the techniques and esoterica surrounding it, but then there's also the culture attached to it. So it gets complicated in terms of like what we're actually looking at there too, I think. But I mean, I don't know if we could look back at Phil Hines' work and stuff and say that like,
that's true.
I would absolutely see ourselves doing these very fun and creative experiments from that source. And I think that Phil Hines is actually a really great person to go to for some of these like basic ideas as well.
Yeah. Say, if for those of you listening that blew up my blog, whoever you were, when I shared how to use my oldest servitor, Pugs. Go to any gargoyle there is, small statues, tattoos, on cathedrals, wherever you find a gargoyle. And if you've lost something, you need to find it. You call on Pugs at that gargoyle and you say, look, you have this much time to put it somewhere where I'll obviously see it. And thank you for your help. And I promise that when I see it, I will eat a cookie for you. Now, you have to eat that cookie once it shows up within, you know, a few hours seems to be the window. If you don't, you're going to permanently lose what was found. As reports have come back. But all this to say, I put that on my blog on weirdwebradio.com, and that thing got shared out a lot. It was more successful than any episode.
Interesting.
I know. It's like Pugs wants to work again. But I created the job opening and got the spirit necessary, I think, for Pugs way, way, way back 20 more years ago when I read Condensed Chaos. I took the technique straight out of there.
Yeah, I think it's a great resource for chaos magic. Absolutely. I mean, even though it's, you know, a little older and stuff, I think it still has a lot of great stuff. And I really appreciate a lot of Heinz' outlooks too, surrounding like there being a sort of law of diminishing returns in terms of like reading about occultism and esoterica is awesome and stuff, but like there's also a lot to be said for like reading about the world in general, reading science books, reading other things, getting a way to like put all of that information into context. And that's something that he's spoken on that I really appreciate as well. So yeah.
Yes, I agree completely. Well, Luxa, is there anything that I didn't bring up, anything you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
Gosh, I don't think so. Yeah, I've got so much stuff going on. It's hard to sort of like remember all
I know.
I really appreciate you taking the time to like talk with me and to having me on and everything. This has been really cool. And yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you. I always enjoy getting to talk to you, and thank you for taking time out for us to hit record when we're having a conversation. So for those looking to get involved in all this, where again do they find you?
You can find me on Instagram at Lux Occult Pod. You can also email me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com if you have any questions about anything that I said today. I'd be happy to answer as best I can. You can find my podcast where the podcasts are cast. It's Lux Occult Podcast. You can also find it on YouTube as well. And if anybody is interested in joining the Discord server, please get me on Instagram or send me an email and I will get you a link to that.
Awesome. Okay. And one thing I wanted to know, I don't know if I said it the first time you're on the show or not, but for folks who, if you want to dig into chaos magic and you're not sure about reading a book or what book to buy, you're just curious first before you put money there, go to Lux Occult Podcast, scroll all the way to the bottom to the early episodes where Lux teaches her brother chaos magic.
Yeah, the first couple episodes of the show, I really wanted to give listeners a sort of like just context about some of the language that we're going to be talking about and the general concepts and everything. So the first couple episodes of the show are called Explaining Chaos Magic to My Brother. And yeah, that could be a great place to dip a toe in and see if it sounds like something that's interesting to you.
Yes, and they are excellent, and they're a lot of fun too. Your brother and you have such great chemistry.
Yeah, my brother and I also make a podcast together called Ad Hoc History. So if people want to hear us dive into some of the historical figures and try to unpack what things might have been like for them from a sort of like human perspective, that's kind of what we try to get into there. And we just did like 3 hours on Stalin, so that was interesting.
Yeah. Yep. Ad Hoc History. Go listen to
Ad
that
Hoc
one
History.
Too. Yeah.
Check it
out. All right. For everyone listening, thank you as always. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you listening to the show. Please share it out on your network. Share it with your friends. Please go check out Lux Occult Podcast and Lux's show. Like I said, it is every bit the best things about what a radio show would be, only it's occult themed, you know? Yeah. So please go check those out. Scroll through it, find the people that are being interviewed that interest you, you know, and dive in that way. Other than that, thank you as always for, being here. Luxa, thank you for being here. If you want to hear the rest of this conversation, you're going to have to go to patreon.com/weirdwebradio or go to weirdwebradio.com and click join the membership. Stay weird out there, my friends.
Stay weird.
And now it is bonus audio time. Luxa, you're back. Are you ready?
I never left. Yes.
You never left. Usually the first thing I would ask here is what famous person's resting place would you most like to visit and why? Now I'm just more curious. Do you want to hear how they just answered that question? What famous person's resting place would you most like to visit? That and many others, including what they think about the afterlife.
what they may or may not do in cemeteries, what are their traditions, magical practices that have to do with the dead, folklore that surrounds their homes, and so much more, available for only $5. $5 a month. Even if I make more than one episode in a month, it's still just $5 a month at patreon.com/weirdwebradio, or go to weirdwebradio.com and click join the membership. You can find me on Instagram at weirdwebradio. You can find me on Facebook as Weird Web Radio, or come join the new, fun, and exciting Weird Web Radio Facebook group. Thank you again for being here. Stay weird out there, my friends.